Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting of the General Government Committee to order. It is October 9th, 2024 at 6 p.m. May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Dennehy?
Here.
Councilmember Maloney?
Here.
Councilmember Schmischer?
Here.
Councilmember Stein? Absent. Councilmember Tracy?
Here.
Councilmember Worthington?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hemrick?
Here.
Mayor Troutman?
Here.
Thank you for that. So the topic for this evening's discussion is the Executive Director of the Public Utilities Commission and support staff, as well as the Colorado Office of Utility Consumer Advocate, joining us via Zoom, will be here to discuss the PUC's process for hearing rate cases and what to expect during a public hearing. So this is an informational meeting. It is a little bit less formal than some of our council meetings. Although if you do want to ask a question, I would ask that you fill out one of the forms to make it easy on our clerk when she goes to make the meeting minutes, and bring those up to her if you would. But with that, I'd like to introduce the Executive Director of the Public Utilities Commission, Rebecca White. And would you like to introduce anyone that you have with you?
I would, Mayor Pro Tem. Thanks so much. So with me tonight is Ruthie Harper. She's with the Attorney General's Office, so counsel to the Commission, and is here to help me not answer any questions I can't answer. But also I may call on her if you have a particular question I can answer, but can't. Thank you. So can I go ahead?
Yes, so please go ahead.
All right. Well, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Thank you so much for the time tonight. I understand we're the only thing on your agenda, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. I came into this job about 18 months ago, and one of my top objectives was to increase the transparency around the work of the PUC. I think we have a very important role to play in making a lot of decisions that impact the lives of a lot of Coloradans, but we tend to be a pretty insular regulatory agency. To the extent I can break down those walls a little and explain how we work, that's what I'm trying to do. So tonight I've got a set of slides, and thanks so much for bringing them up. What I'll do is touch on two main topics. One, I just would like to explain the Public Utilities Commission a little bit more. How we came about and how we sort of approach regulation across a bunch of industries. And then I will talk about how we will deliberate on the Black Hills rate case. Important to note, I am not a decision maker in the case, and I'll explain this later. And so I can't and won't get into the particulars of what's before the commission or how it might go about, but I do want to explain how seriously we take it and why it takes us as many months as it does. So I love the mission of the PUC. I think it's rather beautifully crafted, but I'll draw your attention to a couple of the key phrases here because I think they're really important. So our job at the end of the day is to ensure that the people of Colorado receive safe, reliable, and reasonably priced services from the industries we regulate that is consistent with the economic, environmental, and social values of our state. Just a really nice mission when you sort of look across our industries. Not always an easy one, but I think it states well our job. Over the last 114 years, and that's how old the Utilities Commission is, our portfolio of what we regulate has sort of grown and shrunk again. You can imagine over a decade ago, our telecom work was quite extensive because that was the era of the Mama Bells when there was a lot of monopoly control in the telecom. With the breakup of that industry, a lot of what we focus on now is 911 regulation and deaf, hard of hearing services. Railroads has also been sort of an interesting transition. We were actually a railroad commission before we were a public utilities commission back in the 1800s. But up until the passage of a bill last year, most of our railroad work was really focused on rail crossings with highways. Our utility work, however, has been quite a lift for the commission for many years, and that has really increased over the last 4 or 5 as Colorado has moved to a clean energy portfolio. A couple interesting notes about the commission itself. We are actually an agency within the Constitution with sort of explicit powers stated there that we have the job of regulating public utilities in Colorado. We are also an independent agency, so even though we sit within the larger framework of the Department of Regulatory Agencies, we are sort of held apart, and that is really to protect the integrity of the commission and their ability to reach decisions independently. Bit of economics, but I think this is really important because so much of our job is regulating what are known as natural monopolies, and that is exactly what we have in the utility space. In exchange for the people being served by just one set of wires coming from one company and not 5, 10, or 15, or one set of natural gas pipes and not 5, 10, or 15. We've got one company providing that, but the trade-off there is a lack of consumer choice. And so that's the important role of the Utilities Commission, to provide that oversight and protect consumers. That relationship is typically thought of as the regulatory compact, whereby the utility, and in this case Black Hills, agrees to provide safe, reliable, and reasonably priced services to all the customers in their service area. And we, the Utility Commission, agree to provide the utility with a reasonable opportunity to recover its costs and earn a reasonable rate of return. So really, really important concepts for our work. We are set up in a very particular way to achieve that objective. So the decision makers at the commission are the 3 appointed commissioners. They are appointed by the governor for 4-year terms. So we have 3 commissioners in place now. They serve in a lot of proceedings like judges. They have both quasi-judicial and quasi-legislative authority, which means they have to very much act like judges and really be cautious of any ex parte communications they have. And that's one of the many reasons you would see me at a meeting tonight and never a commissioner, because they are really held apart. My job is to run the place, the staff and the budget, but it also gives me the ability to work on things like improving our communications and the transparency that I mentioned before. But I'll just stress again, I'm not a decision maker in the rate cases, and would never pretend to be, nor do I have particular insight into what the commissioners will decide. Another important part of our structure is we actually have 2 different sides of the house within the commission, and there is a very, very deliberate firewall between them. And in fact, if you were to visit the PUC, you would see a structural wall separating the 2 sides of our house. So I've got a staff of folks who advise the commission. They are assigned to the commissioners to help them deliberate, consider the proceedings, summarize things, research, help them come up with their decision, and really help them do what is a pretty difficult job. That team is held very apart from what's called trial staff. So we've got a group of economists, accountants, engineers, other experts in utility regulation who intervene in proceedings just as you all as the city of Canyon City. So they tear a case apart and will come to the commissioners with their own filing on how they think the commission should decide. They will never talk to the advisors, so there's no sharing of information, and we protect that very closely. But it is a really important part of the commission because we are able to hire these pretty brilliant people who know the utilities hopefully as well as they know themselves and can bring to the commission sort of a public interest view. So when it comes to rate cases, which are some of the biggest proceedings that we have, this is when the quasi-legislative function comes in for the commission. And I guess I'll point you to the last bullet. I realize this is a sort of a weighty slide, but the job of the commissioners, and again it is a hard one, is to weigh the utilities proposal and the overall record of the case and determine rates that they consider just and reasonable that balance both the investor, so the utility, and consumer interests. This process takes a while. It's typically around 250 days. And it goes something like this. It all starts when the utility comes to the commission with their initial filing, which is called an advice letter. That started for the Black Hills rate case, I think it was June 14th, when Black Hills said we are interested in raising rates. The next step from that is the commission sets a procedural schedule, which is really important because it tells all the parties when they need to file testimony, when Black Hills needs to respond to that testimony, when there's responses to the responses, and then when hearings start before the commission. It is also when we set the schedule for public comment hearings. And I'll remind you of that schedule, but I know you all know that we'll be here in November for a hearing in Canyon City. We get into deliberations then, and then after all the arguments have been before the commission and they have the opportunity to ask their questions, they begin to write their order. They reach a final decision, but that doesn't have to be the end. The parties who filed in the case have the option to request a, Ruthie, I always forget the 3 R's, a request for reconsideration and rehearing. Thank you. So essentially asking the commission to go back and look and see if they can change their mind. And then the ultimate, I guess, decider, if the party wants to, is to take it to district court. So that's where things would ultimately end up. So for Black Hills, like I said, we started this journey on June 14th. This is considered both a phase 1 and phase 2 rate case. All that means is the commission is reaching sort of 2 sets of decisions. One, they will decide the rate impact that they will approve, but they will also then decide as part of phase 2 which of the customers will pay what. There's really 2 main buckets of customers in this case, the residential customers and then small commercial. So they make both of those decisions within this case. I know council, as interveners, you're generally aware of what Black Hills has requested. What's stated here is sort of what they've put to the commission, their words. So an increase in $37 million in their rate case, which would have both a residential and commercial impact of around $20 per month for residential and $25 for small commercial. Again, this is sort of their summary of what they've filed. So we find ourselves today here on October 10th, or we're 9th today, I think, just a couple days out from one of the key deadlines in this case, which is the filing of testimony. That is due October 11th. I'm sure your council is hard at work, as are our trial staff right now, getting ready to file all that testimony. The next big step is we start the public hearing process. So we have a total of 4 public hearings, including a virtual one, but we'll start in Pueblo first with 2 hearings at the end of the month. Those will be in person, so the commissioners will be down. November 8th, Black Hills, their deadline for responding to the testimony, so their rebuttal is due. And then we're back with another public hearing. Thank you all for hosting us here on November 19th. If there is a settlement in this case, and that is always an option for parties to come to an agreement that they present to the commission that they've reached a settlement, that would happen on November 20th. Assuming that doesn't happen, the commission would move into their formal hearings on the case in early December. And really important sort of part of the transparency here is anytime the 3 commissioners are together, it is an open meeting, it is streamed on YouTube. So everything that they are saying and asking can be viewed by anyone. And then our last public hearing as of the schedule right now would be a virtual hearing. That's on December 5th. That gets us through Christmas, as when I mentioned the commission would then go in deliberation, so that's set now for January and February of next year. Assuming we stay on this schedule, the commissioners could potentially have a final written decision out by early March, which means that new rates could take effect pretty soon thereafter, mid to late March. That is, of course, assuming there isn't that triple R and there isn't a request for the commission to go back and look at things. I think I'm stuck. Where's the machine? There we go. All right. I'll just cover a few more things and then open it up for questions. So 2 major groups of parties we have of importance in this case are, of course, the interveners. These are individuals or organizations usually, and you all, like the City of Canyon City, who demonstrate that they have a specific interest in the outcome of the case. We have a number of interveners, and I'll list those for you, but I know you're familiar as well. And then the other important part of this is the public commenters. I do like the way this slide is worded, because one of the important roles of the public comment is not just for the commissioners to hear what the public has to say, but for the interveners. And so we were really deliberate in coming up with a procedural schedule and setting the public comment hearings to sprinkle them kind of throughout the proceedings, so both the commissioners and the parties are hearing from the public at key points and could take that into consideration. So a long list of interveners, which is of no surprise given the importance of this case to the people of Southern Colorado. On the government side, we have both the trial staff that I mentioned, but also the utility consumer advocate. And you'll hear later from Joe Pereira tonight. Joe and his team at the utility consumer advocate, completely separate organization from the PUC. They are a full party and an intervener, and we sort of protect the separation of their intervention just as we would with any other party. Within the local governments, you all know that you're joined by Pueblo City and County, as well as the Pueblo Economic Development Corporation, as well as a few other entities. Large customers have intervened, and then several nonprofits that represent sort of low-income consumers. Certainly that is the perspective that the Energy Outreach Colorado brings to any intervention. Unions have intervened, the Solar Association, and then a couple environmental interests with the Western Resource Advocates and the Sierra Club. All right, public commenters I spoke to, and then this I've talked to already, but this is our schedule for the public hearings as of right now. And of course, public hearings is not the only way we can accept comment. Folks can write us at any time. It's most helpful if we receive that before January when the commission starts deliberating. We've already gotten a lot of written comments in on this hearing. We also just take phone calls. So people leave a recording. We transcribe that. If it's in Spanish, we'll translate it. We will have a court reporter at all public hearings, so they're actually capturing every single word of what is said, and then that becomes part of the record. I'm going to leave it there. And so, Mayor Pro Tem, I don't know if you want to maybe take questions and then we can turn it to Joe Pereira, but however you want to move forward, I'd be happy to entertain some questions.
I would suggest because of the distinct possibility of questions creating more questions, I would suggest that we go to Mr. Pereira first, and then we'll come back to council and get the audience involved too.
All right, thank you.
So, Mr. Pereira, if you, hopefully you're unmuted. If you would like to add to the conversation here, we'd sure appreciate it.
I think I'm set to go. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for the invitation. Let me start just by apologizing profusely that I couldn't be in person today. We had a circumstance arise relative to this case that needed my attention this afternoon, and so it's very difficult to be in two places at once. And so I apologize. I would extend an offer to any member of the council, mayor pro tem, that if you need me to visit Canyon City and have individual meetings, I'm more than happy to do that at your convenience. Whether it would be next week or weeks from now, I'm definitely very open to that to make up for my in-person absence.
Thank you for that offer
today. So let me just start again by introducing myself. I'm Joe Pereira. I'm the Deputy Director of the Colorado Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate. I can just briefly describe what we do. We are a small office, also in Dora, like the PUC, but as Ms. White mentioned, distinct and different from what the PUC does. We're not a regulator. We are an advocate and a party before the Public Utilities Commission. Our statutory direction is to represent the public interest before the PUC, and colloquially that means we represent residential, small business and agricultural customers as groups in proceedings before the PUC and the courts. We are very active at the PUC. Today I looked at our case list, and we are currently active in around 70 proceedings, and this is pretty normal. Rate cases are an activity that we are always involved in and always representing customers' interests in these cases. Broadly, our mission has changed over the years, but the consumer advocate is really commonly thought of as trying to weigh short and long-term costs in these cases. The legislature has added other considerations to our mission. Most recently, these are issues like decarbonization and just transition. And so when we develop advocacy in these proceedings, it's trying to develop an argument and a case that thinks about all of these different considerations. And so that's what you will see from us in the Black Hills proceeding. We're an intervener by right. And so what that means is the legislature has given us a kind of shortcut to be involved in cases. Basically, all we have to say to be involved in a proceeding at the PUC is, hey, we'd like to be part of this and represent this interest, and we're allowed in a proceeding. This is different than permissive intervention, which you all are familiar with, where a party has to demonstrate to the commission that there's that they have a tangible interest in this proceeding. And so that's where we sit. We, as I mentioned, are crafting advocacy, and we'll submit answer testimony on Friday, just like most of the other parties in this proceeding. I'll start by saying this is a different and unique rate case than we typically see. Rate cases are quite formulaic from our perspective. The issues that are generally argued about amongst parties are generally the same. These are issues like ROE and capital structure and projects that have cost recovery for projects that have been developed since the last rate case. What's unique about this proceeding are the special economic conditions that are represented by Pueblo and Canyon City and other cities and counties that have special interest in this proceeding. And so one of our concerns, or one of the challenges we see here, is that normal rate making might not be sufficient to deal with the economic challenges and the rates relative to Black Hills territory. And so we're trying to craft advocacy that elaborates on those conditions and makes recommendations to the commission on how it might move forward. Where this gets complicated is the commission is tasked at meeting just and reasonable rates for the utility, and Ms. White briefly touched on this rhetorical term called the regulatory compact and what that means. And so we're really focused on the reasonableness part of this proceeding, and hopefully trying to focus the commission on what does reasonable mean, and how reasonable is a subjective term relative to the utility and relative to its territory. And what might be reasonable for Boulder or for public service may not be reasonable for Black Hills and Southern Colorado. And so we look at this proceeding differently, and we're hoping that the commission does so as well. And so I'm really here today to answer any questions or give the UCA's perspective on some of the questions you might have. As a party, I certainly have a little more freedom to articulate perspectives from our office's viewpoint that maybe because of the nature of decision making, the PUC might not be able to answer. And so I'm certainly available for that. And with that, I think I would open the floor and be happy to answer any questions for the council.
Thank you very much, Council. I'd remind you that we don't have our button system working tonight, so if you would like to ask a question, just kind of flag me down and we'll go from there. Councilmember Tracy.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. I think we probably will have some number of questions. I'll just start by asking Joe, and thanks to the Utility Consumer Advocate Office and also the PUC for being here. We appreciate that. Given the mission of the UCA, the Utility Consumer Advocate Office, as I understand it, and you mentioned about the responsibility to represent the interests of residential, small business, and agricultural utility customers, can you say a little bit about how you gather information from those customers so that you can do that job of representing their interests?
Councilmember Tracy, thank you for that question. It's good to see you again. This is an interesting and challenging task that we have. So as a governmental agency, outreach is always not one of our strong suits. And so we do our best whenever possible to try to meet with local government officials, local groups, to do the best we can to have some idea of the pulse of the customers that are impacted. In this proceeding, we've met with several different entities in Pueblo, nonprofit groups, governmental entities, as I mentioned. We are conducting our own community outreach events coming soon. We'll have an announcement on an event on October 24th in Pueblo to talk about and give customers tips on how to provide meaningful public comment for these events. And just, having worked in this area for a long time, having responses relative to kind of common issues that customers bring up. I will also note in this proceeding, and actually others more recently, we've seen lots of public comment, and so our team members read and log all of these public comments, and also we enter the public comments into the record on a regular basis. There's an odd little quirk about public comment and how it fits into the record, and so we take the responsibility to make sure that all the public comments that are received up to the hearings are entered into the record.
Thank you. Do we have other questions from council? Or
I think Emily answered my question a little more eloquently than I would, but the concern that I have is that you have mentioned, and so has Ms. White, that we are somewhat unique in economic strata and everything else in our area. We have compiled information. Would we share it with you? Do you have information that we would share as well with maybe what Black Hills would have? Because we are different, and our economics are quite a bit lower than other areas of the state, and I'm concerned about that picture that should be clear, and that would be made clear by data that would be coming from our area, and if that is mutually shared between the parties. Does that make sense?
Is that for me, sir?
I'm just throwing, yes, I think I tried
So,
that.
Yeah, I think functionally, what will happen is several parties within this proceeding, including Black Hills, actually will have done economic, demographic research and made that part of their case. And so, in answer testimony, that will be entered into the record, and that record is what the commission will use in its decision making. We, of course, will have our own research, and we will see yours, and we will see other parties, and all of that information within the record then gets synthesized into the next steps. And so, if we see additional information that's compelling from Canyon City or from Energy Outreach Colorado or any of the other parties that we feel like adds to our position or is common ground with our position, we would certainly highlight that in the hearing as well as in the statement of positions. This also, is an opportunity for parties to talk and see if there's common ground for settlement or shared positions.
Thank you. Sure, Emily?
This might be a broader question for, I don't know, perhaps both the PUC and the UCA. And we're reminded of the importance of what the state is doing through policy to move toward more of an electrified transportation system, more electrification of buildings and so forth over time. I think that many of us see the need for that, and we can see it literally on the radar map as a massive hurricane is about to hit Florida, that we know we have to do something all over this world about what's happening with global warming. And so we understand and support the idea of electrifying transportation, buildings, homes, et cetera. But in a region of the state that's already paying what's generally viewed as the highest cost electricity in the state, and then facing some kind of increase in that cost, in a part of the state, as has already been mentioned, where there's a high poverty rate, and the median household income is something like 39% below the statewide median, and even farther below the Northern Front Range median household income. Can things like that be taken into account in a particular rate case like this, where we know that there's this desire to move in a certain policy direction, but our area could be left behind because people just aren't going to be able to do this on their own here. So I don't know if this fits in at all with the rate case or not.
And you might say who you're directing the question to.
Either or both.
Joe, why don't you start on this one?
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember. I think all information and facts are relevant in the decision making in this proceeding. I don't pretend to know what the commissioners will find important or compelling, but everything you brought up, I think, is relevant. From the UCA's perspective, I would say that this case doesn't strike us as being a negative reflection on the energy transition. That the issues you brought up about the need to move toward decarbonization or electrification are important state goals, and actually we see the renewable energy, for example, or increasing load as being factors that will drive down rates. It's our perspective that this proceeding is about the current status of rates and then the utilities practices relative to kind of building on which may be eclipsing some of the benefits that we will see from the energy transition. And so we think that it's important for the commission to weigh the utilities practices relative to its territory and how those are countering some of the benefits that we might see from the energy transition.
Councilwoman, thank you for the question. I wanted Joe to respond first because I asked him to, but because he can be a little bit more forthright than I can and give you a fuller answer. I will note an important thing I think Joe said earlier also is that the commission's obligation to set just and reasonable rates, that is a qualitative objective, but it does allow them, like Joe said, to look at particular circumstances and read the full record when it's presented to them. And we understand there's differences across the state, and they do take that seriously.
Just a quick follow-up comment, if I can. Just a little piece of history is that we, basically 1 month before the rate case was filed, Black Hills presented to the city's Energy Advisory Committee and showed a slide that indicated that with the clean energy plan, that our costs as customers was going to go down between now and 2030. And then 1 month later, the rate case was filed, saying something very different. And so this is very much on the minds of maybe many of us here that, it's a little bit of whiplash to go from one pronouncement to the next in only a month, and I'll leave it at that.
I do have a comment myself. I would like to say that on the issues of global warming, decarbonization, electrification of buildings and vehicles, this council has not taken a position. And that was the we, I believe, that Emily was using is speaking for herself and people that she talks to, as opposed to a formal position taken by the council.
Not exactly, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm talking about state policy. I'm not talking about individuals.
But it's not about the council position, is my point, is the council has not taken a position on those items.
I don't know that we need to.
My question, I do have a question. So what we heard so far is that Black Hills is seeking a $37 million increase to the rate base of $180 million. And of course, that involves different percentages for different users and may result in different rate schedules for different users. And so how much does the advocacy side of the public utilities get down into those details to say, well, you should charge this rate class X and that rate class Y, or things like that? That'd be for either or both of you.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, again, because it gets a bit into the belly of the case, I'll defer largely to Mr. Pereira. I will say generally, there's no stone that's not unturned when we look through the case. So it is a very thorough examination. But I'll let Joe kind of share how they look at it from the UCA.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Earlier, Ms. White mentioned that this is a phase 1 and a phase 2 proceeding. And so what the commission will do is they will examine both the revenue requirements. So imagine that as the size of the pie, and that's taken care of in phase 1 of the proceeding, and then how to divide up the pie. And that's the phase 2 portion. And so they will examine which classes of customers cause which costs, and then that will be used to determine what part of the revenue requirement is divided amongst those classes. And so they will dig deep into both the issue of what is the revenue required to move forward, and then how is that split amongst classes.
Thank you. We do have a council member on Zoom. Council Member Schmischer, would you like to jump in here?
Thank you. Yes, I had a follow-up question to an earlier part of the conversation. First off, thanks so much to both of you for your presentations. Joe, I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more about kind of what your office's analysis shows will lead to that decrease in costs with the switch to renewable energy sources. I think that that's something that we hear a lot about, but at a very high level, and don't really hear the details as to over the longer term how the state's vision on that will actually lead to decrease in costs. And as Councilwoman Tracy mentioned, it did cause this bit of whiplash for a lot of our consumers. So it would be really helpful to get your expert understanding and perspective on what the state believes that we'll see over the longer term. Thank you.
Councilmember, thanks for that question. I want to just make sure, I qualify. This is the perspective of the UCA, not necessarily of the state or any legislator or the governor or whatnot. I think, this is the scenario you laid out about being told, hey, this energy plan will drive down costs, and then a month later, seeing a filing for an increase is actually a common story, right? I've heard that from many folks at this point. What I would say is that utility regulation is complex, and oftentimes, we use words and have subtleties about the things we say that for average folks just mean, when we say something like, renewable energy will drive down costs, what we're meaning is actually the price of energy will go down relative to these sources. But that doesn't tell the full picture, because there are also costs for new infrastructure. There are returns related to the investments that the utilities make. And so the cost of energy may be trending down, but spending, for example, may be trending up. And so those two things can be in contradiction. And what we do in the case is to try, to sort out with the commission, what are appropriate costs? How is the utility acting relative to these costs, to try to make sure that these savings relative to, wind being less expensive compared to natural gas, or in other utilities compared to coal, so that customers can realize those benefits. And that's part of the fight that's happening here. One of the challenges is, again, kind of the subtlety that's happening is the Clean Energy Plan hasn't been implemented yet. And so there are no resources built. The case today is about present and past state. And so we're asking questions about, why are these costs going up even before we get to Clean Energy Plan, for example. I probably made that even more complicated, but if I'm happy to answer any follow-ups if that didn't make sense.
No, it definitely did make sense. I think I was hoping to just kind of hear the picture from your expert perspective, perhaps 5 to 10 years from now, after those initial investments have been made, in terms of the infrastructure required for the newer energy sources, and what, I guess, if you have those projections already as to when we would start to see the break-even point, and begin to see decreases on the other side.
Yeah, so I don't have the statistics readily available, but I'm happy to follow up on that. I'm going to walk through some of that. I think, for now, it's useful to think about these fuel sources providing downward pressure on rates in the future. And, unfortunately, like everything these days, costs continue to go up through inflation and lots of other for lots of other reasons. And so think about the cost of these resources providing downward pressure compared to the counterfactual. And that's, I think, an important way to think about what these technologies will do to rates 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'd appreciate the follow-up. Thanks so much.
I'm happy to.
Did you have something?
I do.
Please.
This is probably more of a comment to the people here rather than to you folks and to Joe. But I think anybody that knows a little bit about your bill every month is the fact that we're still paying for a lot of the infrastructure that is now being outdated. And so that's a lot of the problem, is the fact that we're paying for facilities that were built 5 or 6, 7 even years ago, and yet now we're being asked for the utilities because of legislation and rightful thinking in many cases regarding the climate in a sense, but we're now being added onto, and it makes it difficult for the general public to be able to understand why, and also to be able to actually pay for it. So just thought I'd throw that out.
Thank you.
If I could,
Sure, please.
I just wanted to thank the councilwoman for the comment. It is complex. There are, right now, I think several different proceedings before the commission that deal with they come through different channels, right? So we have energy resource plans and clean energy plans and gas infrastructure plans. I think part of our obligation at the PUC and where we need to step up is to do a better job of explaining the cumulative impact and what that means in terms of the bills. Because we take these in pieces, but there's a whole story there. And so I take the comment and appreciate and agree with it, that and I'm trying to do more within the PUC to explain that better.
And I've got a question for you, kind of generated by that discussion. So as the PUC and the UCA go through there and perform their functions, do their jobs and perform their functions, a lot of times you identify areas where legislation is needed to address problems perhaps that exist with the current laws. Who does that? Is that the province of the Public Utility Commissioners, or who is the one that essentially acts as a lobbyist to, if I can be so crass, to approach the legislature on needed changes to the law?
Mayor Pro Tem, that's a great question. So the way, boy, that's a multi-layered question. So if, to the extent that changes are noticed by our staff that would improve the way our statutes work, we would take those ideas to the governor's office and point out that there's an issue here that might be worth legislation. I will note that from the big picture, about every 4 to 6 years, the entire statute that guides the Public Utilities Commission comes before the legislature as part of the sunset review. And so that's when the legislature can step back and think, are there pieces of this, we have very specific regulations on taxis now. Are there pieces of how we regulate taxes that need to be considered? So every 4 to 6 to 8 years, there is that comprehensive review. But in terms of discrete pieces of legislation, to the extent we have sort of a minor voice in that, we would work through the Gov's office.
Thank you. Yes, Emily.
Thanks. In 2021, the Colorado legislature passed Senate Bill 21-272, signed into law in June of 21, which added Section 3 to Colorado Revised Statute 40-2-108, stating in part the following: the Commission shall promulgate rules requiring that the Commission, in all of its work, including its review of all filings and its determination of all adjudications, consider how best to provide equity, minimize impacts, and prioritize benefits to disproportionately impacted communities and address historical inequalities. And I guess my question is for Joe. Is this something that The Utility Consumer Advocate Office will raise, if you can answer the question, will the UCA raise this in its testimony on this case?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, this is a directive toward the PUC, but also, I mentioned earlier, we have a broad array of considerations, and environmental justice is one of the considerations that we have to consider in our advocacy. And so there are obvious equity issues from our perspective that are raised in this proceeding, and so we will make arguments relative to that.
Thanks.
Okay, I think it's about time to let the audience have a shot at questions, and so I'll take these slips as I receive them. Tom Mallory, did you care to say something? Yeah. So please, so that the millions of people watching online can hear you.
Hi, thank you for the
Yes.
opportunity. I purchased solar panels for my roof over 7 years ago. And one of the selling points was to protect myself, not just from rate hikes, but also the high usage daytime rate hikes. Okay? I was surprised to find out that the last time we had they initiated those daytime high rate increases, they didn't give it to the people with solar panels. I was paying more for their energy than they were buying it from me for. And I assume, I can't assume otherwise, they're probably going to do the same thing with a rate hike. Am I going to get paid for what I give them? That's to anybody who wants to answer.
I can assure you, council doesn't have the answer to that question.
I might need to sidebar with you, Mr. Mallory, but what you're referring to is time of use rates, which is a strategy that's been put in place to try to encourage people to stagger how they use energy so that when there's peak demand, we're using less energy. The issue of how solar factors into that, and the fact that, we are not right now in the state, and I think maybe we'll be here somewhere where when you put solar on your house, it just goes within your own little, your virtual power plant is what we call them, so that you can become kind of an independent power producer. We're on a long way to a journey towards that, where you can receive more of the direct benefits. So I hear you and understand. I'm glad you put solar on. I hope it has had some benefits to you. But I don't think the relationship with the time of use rates is probably what it needs to be for you to see the full benefits of that. And Joe, feel free to.
It won't encourage people to put solar on if they're going to treat the customers that way.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I understand.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I would just add in this proceeding, as Ms. White mentioned earlier, the Solar and Storage Association is a party to the proceeding, and one of the issues that has been brought up is discussion on net metering and compensation relative to residential solar. And so I imagine we will see some discussion of that in the case.
Thank you. Interesting. Kathy, you had something?
I may be talking old school rather than what is now, but when solar, way back when solar, you put on solar, you paid retail, they gave you wholesale. Is basically the way it worked, is they paid you back less than what you were paying, because they're going to give you the price of what the kilowatt would go out onto the open market in a wholesale perspective, and yet on your bill, when you're actually paying the difference, you're paying the current rate. So that's the difference, right? A lot of it.
Thank you. Julie Holmes, do you still have a question?
I'm she, but I think my question will be answered.
Thank you very much. Kathy Madonna.
Thank you. I have several questions, if that's all right. So I just go through them. The first one I have is, why don't we have a hard copy of the PUC presentation so that we can distribute that to fellow citizens who aren't here? If we could get a copy of that so that we can understand better. Overall, I just want to know who's working on my behalf. The PUC and the Utility Commission advocate. If you could define reasonable return that the providers are asking for, do you compare what the economic stability of the area is compared to the profits that the provider is making? Who provides you that information? Is it our responsibility? Do you do your own research? Each of you have separate researches. Does the city have to provide that? I also want to know who the interveners are. Who's working for my behalf? I understand Pueblo is, Canyon and Florence. Is Fremont County? What other cities in southern Colorado? I want to know who all the interveners are. You know, if we can work as a group, it gives us more power. Do you understand, are you taking into consideration the devastation that this would cause, for example, our Florence downtown area, when we have small businesses that are barely getting by with this economic status? What information do you need from us to prove that we cannot tolerate this? We're not only going to get it. And then that's the other thing. On the PUC site, it says 26% overall, but then has 20.4 for consumers and a different amount for businesses. We need clarification on that. What the actual rate increase is, how that's justified. I'd like to know the net profit of Black Hills Energy. I'd like to know what the CEO makes. And do you compare that to other cities? Is there a ratio of how much they can make? What is a reasonable profit again? And what's outlandish? To me, what they're doing now is outlandish. We're paying more, we're a poorer county, poorer area. So again, I would like to know who the interveners are and what specifically is required from them, what's required from us, and who you're meeting with. Thank you.
And I would assume once we receive that, a copy of that presentation, that we will post it on our website. Would that be correct? I believe the interveners are listed on there.
They are listed. It is posted on the website. It's part of today's agenda, so it is on the city's website.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, can I piggyback on that? Maybe for Mrs. White. So Black Hills is a publicly traded company. Are most utilities, maybe just electric, gas, you know, the major ones, are most of them publicly traded companies, or a lot of them structured in other ways?
Sure. Mayor Pro Tem, I'll take that question. And then, I should have covered this at the beginning, because the PUC's regulatory authority is very specific in Colorado. So we regulate 2 investor-owned utilities that provide electric and gas, and that is Black Hills and Excel. We also regulate several investor-owned utilities that only provide natural gas service. So that's Atmos, Colorado Natural Gas, and I'm forgetting one. Through much of the geography of the state, the electricity is provided by co-ops. So like San Isabel, I think, is the closest here. We have about 30-odd co-ops in Colorado. We have no regulatory authority over them. So they are set by either a board that runs them. And then to add to complexity, we have a couple municipal-owned utilities, Colorado Springs probably being the one you're most familiar with, where the city owns both the gas and electricity for those. So because I mentioned earlier, our role really comes in with the monopoly and the investor-owned utilities. So for Colorado, that is Excel and Black Hills.
And I was trying to piggyback on Ms. Madonna's question. She's talking about profits. Is there a conflict when a publicly traded company is looking out for, number one, their shareholders, as opposed to what they're asking for in these rate increases? Is that kind of like part of the deal, and any publicly traded company obviously has to look out for their shareholders. Does that come into play when they're asking for these rate increases?
Yeah, Councilman, I'll just say broadly, that's exactly why we're here. And because the consumers do not have a choice, because it is a monopoly and a natural one to have, as I mentioned, because we don't want thousands of wires running across the city. But because you can't, as a resident, say, I'd rather get my electricity from this other entity, we need to come in and have oversight to make sure that what your bills are just and reasonable.
Okay, thank you.
Spot on. I was going to wonder if the clerk could pull up the slide deck just to show the interveners, but if that is sufficient for your comment, or just to have that in the deck, I'm happy to leave it at that. But Joe, otherwise, I thought we'd sort of divide and conquer some of what we heard. I'll take a couple of the questions, in terms of who is speaking on behalf of the people. I'll just point back to a key part of the staff of the Public Utilities Commission are those trial staff. So on that team, I've got some pretty brilliant economists, engineers, and accountants who are experts in this, and their whole objective is to come to the commission with their own advice on where they think a case should land that is for the public interest. So that is their objective. What is the right thing for the public interest in the proceeding? And they do tear it apart. So that is the voice within the Public Utilities Commission. The other piece is the utility consumer advocate. And then thank you so much for pulling up the interveners. On that, there you go. So if you look at the interveners listed here, Energy Outreach Colorado, as I mentioned, they typically intervene to provide a voice for low-income customers. That is who they serve. They help a lot with people who are behind on their bills, who are in arrears, who are looking at disconnections. So that is a strong voice. And then, of course, you have all the governments who have intervened, including the cities and counties that are listed there. Joe, I think those are the parts of the questions that I can most easily take, kind of given what I am able to say. Do you want to fill in on what you're able to provide?
Sure, I'll maybe just elaborate on each intervener will present its case before the commission. And so the UCA, as I mentioned, represents residential customers as a broad group. And so we will develop advocacy and put a case forward that represents those customers to the best of our abilities. Ms. White mentioned her trial staff will do, a similar presentation with slightly different goals, and Energy Outreach Colorado will as well. And so there will be many parties that put this case on. One thing I would add is the importance of public comment relative to this proceeding. And so our office represents residential customers, and we do that in, a broad way. And I think it's very important for the record and for the commissioners to hear the individual stories as well. And so public comment is the opportunity for all the members of the public here and, broadly to bring that perspective to the case. So I can put forth an advocacy that says we believe rates are too high and this is too much of an impact to the generic bill, and we will do that to the best of our ability. But I think it's important for the commissioners to understand what is the impact to the residents of Canyon City. And, that means, telling your story, saying, this is how electric bills impact my day-to-day life. This is what I'm going to have to sacrifice if the cost of electricity goes up. And hey, commission, here's what I want you to do. And those stories matter too. And so having all of these different perspectives and having the impact from municipal governments and having public comment from residents is what the commission is going to use to decide this idea of reasonableness. What is the right amount of return for the company? What is the right rate impact? How should the company approach rates in the future?
Thank you for that. I'll call on you in just a second, Mr. Administrator, but Kathy, one of the, a source of information that has answers, specific answers to some of your questions are the white papers that the Energy Franchise Committee did produce. And there's salary information in there, profit information in there. It's a complicated picture, but some of that information is in those white papers, which are part of the public record. Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Joe, I think at the beginning of the meeting, you mentioned that you're going to be, or your office is going to be in Pueblo on October 24th doing a session or a work session or something on meaningful public comment. Is it possible to do something like that here in Canyon City or Fremont County before the November 19th meeting?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, I will email you separately and we'll see if we can set up a date.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Yes, Kathy.
Also wanted to comment to Kathy as far as, you know, who the heck is representing you. The same people that we have gotten special attorneys involved that are very much knowledgeable with PUC matters, who are putting together, working with both your government there in Florence and with us here to be able to provide as strong a case as possible to let the general knowledge of what we here in the community are experiencing. So I am quite impressed with what we've come up with so far. So I think I would like to assure you and everybody else that we're working very hard to try and look out for everybody here in the community of both Florence and Canyon City, and obviously anybody else that is being served by Black Hills.
Our next audience member that'd like to speak is Steve Andrews.
Thank you, members of council. Appreciate the opportunity. I've got a comment, a question, and two questions actually. The comment I'll start with to Joe is that I'm looking at the slide that was presented to the Canyon Cities Energy Committee back in May. And Joe, it doesn't talk about energy costs. Well, sorry. The graphic that was shown to us by Black Hills Energy says that average residential customer bills will decrease between now and 2030. And it shows a roughly, I did the math, approximated math, 10 to 12% decrease between now and 2030. That's the cost to implement the Clean Energy Plan. But that's the impact on the average residential customer bill. It doesn't caveat that graphic. It says the bills will go down 10, 12% over the next 6 years. Then, of course, we all, as customers of Black Hills, received this document back in the middle of June, shortly after the June 14th filing. And some of us noted some errors in it. And I just wanted to ask, I know that Councilwoman Tracy asked to see about some corrections on the document about the tiered rate energy charges on this document being misrepresented. And I believe she was told that that misrepresentation was actually just a typo and that the math at the far right was correct. So that's a fair summation of your exchange with Black Hills?
Yes.
Then I would just like to know if anyone's heard anything differently as to those numbers to the far right, whether average residential bills will indeed are projected to go up 18%, and average small business customer bills will go up 10%. Has there been any different information either from the PUC or the UCA on that?
Joe, I think that gets into an area I can't opine on.
Yeah, I believe that that's the representation that they've relayed. I think, Mr. Andrews, what I would say is that if the company has represented that bills will go down, then we should do everything we can to ensure that they stick to that representation, and that the PUC understands that and holds them to it.
Okay. The last thing I'll make a comment. I've been pawing through the testimony of the Black Hills Energy's lead dog, I guess I would say, in the sled hauling the freight of this pretty large increase. His name is Michael J. Harrington. He also was the person presenting the information to us. And on page 72 of his testimony, 71 or 72, I'm not sure which, he writes, customers benefit from clear, accurate, and relevant information from Black Hills, Colorado to help them understand proposed changes to their electric rates. I'm going to leave you with that thought. In a while, not tonight, but in a while, there's going to be a follow-up to that will highlight the concern we have with the phrase clear, accurate, and relevant information shared with customers. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we have Council Member Schmischer.
Thank you. Ms. Madonna's comments made me want to, and the responses thereof, made me want to follow up on a couple of questions that I have. With regard to the costs needing to be just and reasonable, given that Black Hills rates are the highest in the state, how does one determine, or how will the PUC determine if the costs are just and reasonable when they're already higher than everyone else's? And then secondly, the right amount of return for the company, how is that determined again when the costs are already higher than everyone else's in the state? Like, what will they actually be considering, given that how can the costs be considered just and reasonable even as they are right now, given that they're higher than everyone else's, let alone with this huge percentage rate increase? So I would just be curious, as someone who doesn't know as much about the PUC as many other members on council, I would just be curious as to insight into how those decisions are made and how can we actually effectively push back against them when it seems like on surface value, it doesn't make any sense that they would be allowed to have such huge cost increases. Thanks.
Councilman Schmisser, I can't get, of course, into the details of the case. I can say you've described very eloquently the hard job that the commissioners do have, because that is exactly what they've been tasked to do, is to read all the testimony, ask all their questions, and reach a decision to determine exactly that. That's part of the reason it takes 250 days. And there'll be probably thousands of pages of testimony filed, because that is their job. They take it very seriously, and do this in every proceeding that comes before them. But I certainly would defer to Joe to speak more to specifics that he can share.
Sure. There's a wide variety of factors that the commission will look at. Practically, what will happen, for example, is different parties, the company has made an argument, for example, on what their return on equity should be within this proceeding. Parties such as our office would disagree with their ask. And so, you know, we will present evidence and we will make arguments to the commission that say, we don't think that the return on equity that they've requested is just and reasonable. That we would argue for a different level. I think one of the challenges from the UCA's perspective in this proceeding is that a normal rate case generally results in rate increases. It's very rare in utility regulation to see results that hold rates stable or reduce rates. It happens, but it's not common. And so parties like ours will be making arguments to say no rate increase is appropriate here. And here are the other reasons for why, beyond just the normal calculus of, hey, here's how you determine a return on equity, or here's how you determine a capital structure for the utility. And, you know, when I mentioned earlier that, you know, this is a unique and different rate case, this is what I mean. And so, you know, we are hoping that the commission gives more consideration to the reasonableness part of the argument and less consideration to the investor part, or the investors relative to this case. And this is what Ms. White brought up about trying to balance and find where the public interest is.
Amy, I know, Andrea, you have such a small yellow hand.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is a follow-up to, and just maybe a more of a statement on what Councilwoman Schmisser said. I have a basic question. I have lived in different parts of the state. I have lived in a very rugged part of Colorado, which is served by Xcel. And I paid 30% less there for my power. And last winter, we had a particularly nasty storm, and we were without power, some of our people, for 3 days. And so we asked them to come in and talk about it and explain it. And when they finally came in, one of their things was that, well, they had to work in 30 and 40 degree temperatures. I'm like, I was a ski patroller for 12 years. We worked at 30 below, okay? And I'm sure Xcel's people have had to do that a time or two. So I think there needs to be some kind of, at the end of the day with this case, we need some answers as to why Xcel is able to offer power at a more reasonable cost while Black Hills apparently can't. There's no parity there. And obviously this is a much poorer county than Summit County. And so there are older people that I represent, my personal people, who I see them coming to events all over town because there's food. And they're having to make choices like that. So we need, at the end of the day, someone needs to tell us why we pay that much more already. What are we doing? What's happening here that's not happening in other service territories? Thank you.
I don't believe that was directed at any particular person, but if either of our representatives for the PUC or UCA would like to discuss that a little bit.
I would say, I guess, a couple things. One, you've got some incredible folks who've come tonight to speak, and I really hope they'll come again on November 18th so that our commissioners can hear directly, because this is exactly the value of public comment. To answer your question at sort of a high level, there is a distinct difference just in the size of the customer base between Excel and Black Hills, and that does matter. Excel serves a much larger number of much larger commercial number of customers, and that matters. So I don't want to, again, I can't get into the specific of the rates, but I am aware that there is a difference, and they are just sort of much different circumstances.
Just a small correction for those who are listening. It's
Thank you.
November 19th. Yep.
Thank you. Joseph Cordova?
Hello, how you doing? So one of the things, when I first walked in, they did a slideshow presentation. So when I walked in, usually you got papers here about showing what the slideshow presentation is. So how can I get that slideshow presentation to decipher what you are presenting to us and stuff like that? So how do we get that?
We have it on the city website.
Exactly what they presented?
Yes.
Okay. So the other thing is, I really want to reflect on Kathy Madon and Mr. Andrews over here about, a lot of the people here, we can afford, in this room, I can probably say, we can afford the increase, but we don't want it. One of the things is, when you start looking at the older people and the people that can't afford it, how can we look at them and say, it is what it is? Do you guys get commission off the increase? You say no? That gentleman right there? Do you get commission off the rate increase? I know who you are. Yes. Okay, you say not. But you know what, something? How can people afford, with all the other taxes that are being put in our city before the election, and then you guys are coming in after, and the people are struggling on their Social Security and stuff like that? What are we going to do? Put them out on the street? Shut the electricity off? How can we look at them and say, hey, we're fighting for them. All these people here are fighting for them. How can we look at them and say, hey, that's what they did. That's what they do. I mean, look at me. I mean, I know so many people, and one of the things is, what I've done in my life with all the stimulus checks and stuff like that, me and my wife never took it. I mean, we took it, but we helped people out who suffered. And we keep on looking at the people nowadays that reaching out, hey, can you help me out with $20? We'll give them $20. And then you start seeing and say, well, we can't afford the heat, we can't afford the electricity, we can't afford all the increases and all the stuff that's coming up. How can we look at them and say, this is the way it is. We're going to raise the rates. And you look at all these people that come up in there and fight for the, 18% on residential is ridiculous. I got 23 seconds. Is ridiculous. Then you want the business in Canyon City, which is 10%. How can they survive with all the property taxes gone up out of the roof? I got 9 seconds. So come on, look at us. We're fine. We can afford it, but the other people can't.
I would just jump in here a little bit, Mr. Cordova, and say, don't forget what Ms. White has told us. The PUC commissioners will be here to accept public testimony on this case, and I would encourage you to come back and say the same things to the public commissioner, to the
I will.
Public Utilities
I can
Commission.
afford it, but some of the people can't.
I understand, thank you. Buffy McFadden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, City Administrator, Council, Clerk, and thank you for being here, PUC and Attorney General's Office. My name is Buffy McFadden. I just have a procedural question and then an ask. Going back to Mr. Andrews stating about the testimony from Black Hills Energy on clear, accurate, and relevant information. Reminds me of Cy Sperling. He used to sell suits, and he said an educated consumer is our best customer. Going back to that statement, my question procedurally is, if it really is not an ask of 18% for residential and 10% for non-residential or commercial, however it's categorized, and we do find out that that rate increase request is a mixture and it's higher, is there a process to open up the intervention period? The reason I ask is, especially for governmental entities that are doing their budgets, or businesses like ours that are doing our budgets for next year, to absorb more than what we're anticipating is very difficult, especially for governmental entities whose budgets, of course, are due, I believe, this month to be set. And also, I think it would help for a lot of people who are watching this on Zoom live or will come back and watch this, to actually define what an intervener is and the powers that go with intervention and the full scope of that, because we're around this, we forget we know what it is. And then it's just, I want to thank Canyon City Council for intervening, becoming an official intervener. And I believe that period closed back in September or August. And I know the city of Florence is as well. And of course, it's been a while since I've been an intervener as in an official government capacity. But I must say, I'm just hopeful. I would have been hopeful that Fremont County would have intervened as well, but they are not. So a big thank you to those entities that are intervening on our behalf. And thank you.
Please.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, if I could, this is I'm glad Ruthie Harper is here from the Attorney General's office, so some of Ms. McFadden's questions get to sort of legal issues, so I'll turn to Ms. Harper.
Certainly. So 2 issues there. First, taking them in reverse order as to interveners. Yes, the designated time period for intervention has passed, but the commission does accept for consideration out of time a request to intervene, and the commission could also set an additional intervention period. This is all up to the commission. It would have to be asked of the commission by either a potential intervener or a party to the case, which also gets to the first question about the information. And I think the answer there procedurally would be that something that one of the parties to the case would need to raise to the decision makers, to the commissioners, who could then act upon it.
Thanks for that. Any other questions or comments from council? Yes.
I'm not council,
Oh.
but
Yeah.
I had a question that I don't know if it's for Joe or for Ms. White, but just in your experience, how often do utilities ask for a phase 1 and phase 2 at the same hearing?
Mr. Stevens, my tenure at the commission is only about 18 months, so I do not know the answer to that. Ms. Harper, Ms. Pereira, do Do you know if that's more typical or not?
Yeah, Mr. Stevens, I think it's very very kind of situation dependent, and I think broadly, when utilities are out a long time or haven't filed a rate case in a long time, as you see with Black Hills, they're more likely to file a phase 2 as well. And that's, I think, generally because the data around cost causation gets stale at a certain point. And so, since we haven't seen a phase 1 in 8 years and a phase 2 in 6 years or so, I think that's why you see the phase 1 and phase 2. For other utilities that come in for a rate case, a phase 1 rate case, every other year, you don't always see a phase 2 filed with that. And then often the commission requests a phase 2 in a certain amount of time as well.
Thank you.
And any other comments? I would like to thank the Public Utilities Commission and the UCA and the Office of Attorney General for having representatives here to talk to us. And thank you, council members, and thank you, audience members. I think you had some really great questions and comments, and it's great to see you here and involved. I appreciate that. And with that, our next scheduled meeting is November 6th, 2024. And with that, we're adjourned.